To geography students, this is the second part of the Unit 1 Population IB Geography review. So we did this in class. We had all our handouts that we put together as the ceremonial stapling of the pink packets with the sacrifice of a goat. And you got the cover sheet. The cover sheet's really important because this is what the exams will ask you about. So if it's not on there, then either A, Mr. Carly made a mistake and didn't rework it from the IB geography guide, or they're pulling a fast one on you and ask you things you're not supposed to ask you about. So keep that in mind because that's got everything on there that you need to know with the command terms that you would be assessed upon, and some broader questions to think about just for general critical thinking. Again, here's an overview. One thing you have that's blue is the demographic. Oh, shoot. What happened? I guess I clicked it wrong. I don't know. Okay, anyway. One thing you have that's blue, or it might be online, is the demographic transition analysis, Ethiopia and France, where one thing you had to do is you had to look at two different countries and kind of compare their demographic transition over time. What I'm going to cover here is the 1.3 topic, which are issues and challenges, which relates to power and possibilities, and kind of talk you through what we talked about and then what you need to know for those for that section. Okay, first off, though, before we do that, paper 2 is 75 minutes and it's tested on the following things. So in the SL and HL portion of IB geography, there's 3 core units. They are population, climate, and global resource consumption. So you're going to have 10 marks each on each of these, which usually follow the same type of structure, which we'll talk about in a second because you're just doing unit 1 this time. There's also section B, where there's an analysis of one infographic from one of the 3 main units. So it'll be a topic related to something in those 3 main units, and they'll have an infographic and they'll ask you various analysis questions and then maybe do like a comparison. And it's just your ability to understand geographic data. And then one, what I call a long-ish essay, because I used to teach IB history and it's nowhere near like what those used to be. We're talking maybe like 3 paragraphs. You get a choice of 2 questions. They relate again to those 3 main units, and usually one is about one unit and one is about the other unit, a different unit, and then you have to pick one that you answer using evidence and case studies from what you've learned about. The test on Monday, on December 16th, 2024, is going to be on the first unit. So you're going to get 2 marks for analyzing geographic data related to population, just bar graphs, population data, population pyramid, something like that, migration data, dot maps, things of that nature. And then there's 2, what we call 2+2 questions. So anything on the unit cover sheet could be asked about. And 2+2 means they'll usually ask you for 2 things. So you're making like 2 statements of something and then 2 explanations of those things. So 1 for each thing that you talk about. So 2 of those types of questions for a total of 8 points plus 2 is 10 marks. So 10 points total. And this will be an IB grade translation. So the first thing we did in this class or in this topic was we looked at regional and continental differences in these. Well, technically it was these 3 things right here. Sex ratio, which is the ratio of males to females in a population, either at a national, local, or global scale. We looked at aging populations, which generally means nations that have populations whose population pyramid kind of skews towards the 60 to 65 plus years old demographic. So a lot of aging people, older people. Ooh, voice crack there. Family household size, which is just kind of how big are families getting in different areas. And then the last thing, which wasn't a regional continental trend, but it was about the demographic dividend. So it's about what is the demographic dividend? What does it look like? And what happens as a result of it? And there are 2 good articles that you read about that. If you need those again, let me know. I think I put all the stations activities, but just quick review of the demographic dividend because some people are asking about it. Normally when a nation is developing, kind of going through its first couple stages of demographic transition, their population pyramid kind of has a wide base like this and a narrow top because their population is increasing at the bottom, but there's low life expectancies. So you have a pretty low older population. There's not a lot of, if I were to break it up into elderly, middle, working age, and young population, it would kind of look like this. So you got a lot of people in the young population, not many in the middle working age population, and not many at the top because people aren't living very long. as they transition, this group down here, as the nation develops, gets better healthcare, better infrastructure, more stable politics, economic growth, education, all those things from a human standpoint that they're able to do to change their demographics. You'll start to see birth rates go down, and then you basically like the middle of the pyramid, the middle rectangle kind of looks like this, and then you have a small base and a pretty small top, even though people are living longer. They haven't quite reached that age yet where those people were living longer. So it's basically this group here is now having their kids of their own, and they're working, and they make up a large portion of the population, and they're also living longer, so they're able to stay in the working areas longer. But usually in those kinds of nations, those developing nations, you tend to see a lower birth rate, a falling birth rate, but also a falling death rate. And then that's the demographic dividend, and the reason for that is because they have a low dependency ratio. They don't have a lot of dependents as a proportion of their population, but they have a high level of what they call wealth creators, which are people that are able to work and build wealth for nations. There's a couple of reasons that this helps. Those people are able to save more, usually more money, which means they gives governments and businesses the ability to use more funds, because savings ends up leading into loans, which then leads into people investing and people building houses and buying things. It also leads to a growth of human capital, because people, as they live longer and they get better education, which is usually what you see in these countries, are going to have more quote unquote human capital, which means more skills and knowledge. And then also it's going to lead to some economic growth as well. So there's several things that are helpful because of that. You're also not going to see much of a strain on things like pension systems or childcare with the low birth rates and low elderly population. But as you go through this section in the next stage, will now move up to here, and you will start to see a kind of bigger elderly population with a small base like that. It's kind of like a upside down triangle at this point. So that's an aging society. So go back and look at your station's activity. It gives you information about what the global and regional trends are in sex ratio, aging populations, and household size. But the demographic dividend I want to explain. Okay. Challenge 1 we talked about was aging populations, and we used the case study of Japan and how Japan is trying to deal with it. So Japan, once again, is going to see possibly a 50% reduction in its population by 2100, halving its population from its peak in 2017. Because that population is aging, they might be the first nation to really get into that 5th stage of demographic transition, where they are now, declining in their population. Fertility rates very low, 1.4 births per woman, and that you usually want to see be around 2.1 for replacement rates. Japan's traditionally been very wary of immigration as well. Another possibility that you can use to deal with an aging population or a low birth rate is to have people migrate into your country from places that have high birth rates. But Japan culturally and politically has been kind of wary of that over time, even though they've tried to loosen up those restrictions. There's a good graphic here that's in my slideshow that I could post that shows the graying of the population. But one thing we talked about, I didn't have it. One policy to deal with that is called Ikumen, sorry, said it wrong, which is kind of like making fatherhood, here it is right here, making fatherhood attractive to males, trying to change social norms so that women can work even if they've had children, providing more pre- and postnatal care, healthcare, that is, and then getting men into the business, no pun intended, of housework. So that would be part of it. There was a video we watched on that as well. Other issues, like you can do things also, it's not just about getting people to have more babies, but dealing with your aging population in terms of how you're reforming your pension system, your healthcare system, your population density, how you're moving people to different areas, because you don't really maybe want your aging population in a rural area where they lack access to resources, but the urban areas are more population dense, or densely populated, I should say. And then also, just helping people as they age. So one thing that a lot of urban cities in Japan are doing is providing like robot assistants to very tech savvy Japanese. So that was an example of how Europe's trying to deal with theirs and some of their problems. We watched a video on that. And then, all right, so the other 3 types of policies, pronatalist and antinatalist. Pronatalist policies are policies where you try to increase birth rates, not increase migration, but increase your natural rate of increase through birth rates. Pro-antinatalist, our antinatalist policies are meant to decrease them. The classic example is China's one-child policy, but other examples would include more access to family planning, which would be healthcare related to, being strategic's the wrong word, but being intentional about how you're having a family and planning your family. Access to birth control will be part of that, and then things intrusive and violating human rights such as forced sterilization. But you could also do financial incentives for not having children. We also talk about gender equality policies, and you're looking at some things that a lot of countries are doing for gender equality. Gender equality is focusing on closing gaps between men and women, and you can look at these in a variety of ways. It could be education, involvement in the workforce, and along with that are issues with wages. So you're thinking about, are men and women getting the same pay for the same work that they're doing? Political participation in power. So are women participating in the governments of these local and national scales as much as men are? Social norms and mores, and then other social indicators like poverty, access to medical care, child rearing responsibilities. Many of these are dependent on scale. It's very important to think about scale and spatial interaction, scale especially with this. There's challenges facing different regions, nations, and localities, and they're different. Therefore, so are the policies. Therefore, so are how much they think this is an issue. So those are all things to take in consideration. What scale are we looking at? What region of the world are we looking at? All going to be important things. And then at a global scale, gender equality is a driving force in the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So focusing on that, this is a good infographic from the UN and their Sustainable Development Goal of achieving gender equality. Do a quick time check to see what the time is like on my screen recording. I got 3 minutes, so I have one more policy to talk about, and that should be good. All right. Anti-trafficking is the last one. Human trafficking is defined as the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of people through force, fraud, or deception with the aim of exploiting them through labor for profit. You don't need to remember the exact definition for this. It's just moving people in some way, forcibly, typically, or fraudulently by deceiving them for the purposes of exploitation. Sometimes sex trafficking, but there's also sweatshops, labor trafficking, things of that nature. Globally, the UN includes anti-trafficking into 3 of its Sustainable Development Goals. So there are global efforts on the part of the United Nations and other global organizations to deal with trafficking. Nationally, most governments have legislation meant to reduce trafficking. Here are the 3 Ps of reducing trafficking: protection, prosecution, and prevention. Different nations have different laws and policies for that. 2 billion people, though, live in areas where trafficking is not criminalized. So again, it depends on the spatial interaction and the scale that you're looking at. This is a great example of power. Like, how do you see global power? It's really about who makes the decisions about whether or not they want to focus on this and how much of a focus do they place on it. So those are the big policies. And then we did the activity where you looked at some various specific policies. Again, always remembering some specific examples that you looked at is very helpful, especially as you go to take a test on this like a year and a half from now. So that's section 1.3, looking at issues and challenges and possibilities related to demographic transition, and an overview of paper 2. If you have any questions, let me know. Send me an email. Otherwise, we'll see you hopefully on Monday, and we'll all do really well on this. All right.